In the past 4 sutras, Patanjali spoke about the mind and the impressions that are generated upon it by external stimuli. In this sutra, he talks about 5 types of impressions that are created in our mind by external objects.
Shri Dharmananda Guru Charana Kamalebhyo Namaha.
Presenting the Yogasutram of Maharishi Patanjali with the commentary of Maharishi Vyasa, translated and presented by Kuldip Dhiman.
Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacha Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yopakarotam Pravaram Munina Patanjali Pranjaliranatosmi
When our mind comes in contact with external objects, it gets affected by them because those objects generate favorable or unfavorable impressions upon our mind. As external objects are innumerable, the sensations generated by them upon the mind are also innumerable. Although this is the case, for easy understanding, Patanjali divides these innumerable sensations into 5 types. And these 5 types of sensations generate either misery or happiness in us. The ones that generate misery are called kliṣṭākliṣṭāḥ, and those that generate happiness or pleasure are called akliṣṭāḥ. Kliṣṭākliṣṭāḥ may be called afflictive and akliṣṭā may be called non-afflictive. In either case, they disturb the equilibrium of the mind. In order to regain our true nature of supreme bliss, we ought to become impervious to both afflictive and non-afflictive sensations. The fact is that we cannot remove the sources generating these impressions, but we can learn to become unaffected by them. We just cannot even imagine the magnitude of external stimuli that our mind is bombarded with every moment of our lives. We are aware of only a very tiny amount of what is out there. Even with modern technology, most of it is still beyond the reach of our senses, which are designed to filter out most of what is out there in the universe. For example, we have the electromagnetic spectrum that includes radio waves, visible light, and X-rays. Our eyes perceive only the visible spectrum. If they perceived all kinds of light, we would go blind in an instant. The same is true in the case of sound waves. We do not hear supersonic sound waves or subsonic sound waves. If our ears heard every sound frequency, our eardrums would burst. So, if we perceived all that is there in the universe, we would go mad because our senses would not be able to handle so much stimuli. And we should be thankful that we do not perceive everything, otherwise life would not have evolved at all. When these stimuli hit the mind, they create different kinds of sensations upon it. In yogic terminology, these sensations on the mind are called vrittis or sanskaras. Patanjali says that these sensations are innumerable because the stimuli is also innumerable. However, for easy comprehension, Patanjali divides them into 5 types, which can generate either unhappiness or happiness in us. vṛttayaḥ, pañcatayyaḥ, kliṣṭākliṣṭāḥ. vṛttayaḥ, pañcatayyaḥ, kliṣṭāḥ, akliṣṭāḥ. vṛttayaḥ is the plural form of the word vritti, which means sensation. Pañcatayyaḥ means of 5 kinds. Kliṣṭā means afflictive, that is, those generating pain, anxiety and misery. Akliṣṭāḥ, non-afflictive, pleasurable and soothing. vṛttayaḥ, pañcatayyaḥ, kliṣṭākliṣṭāḥ. Sensations generated upon the mind are of 5 kinds, and they are either afflictive or non-afflictive. Commenting upon afflictive sensations, Vyasa says, क्लेशहेतुकाः कर्माशय प्रचये क्षेत्रीभूताः क्लिष्टाः. Afflictions that create conflict and are a breeding ground for accumulative karmas and desires are called afflictive. Describing non-afflictive sensations, Vyasa says, khyati vishaya gunadhikar virodhinyo kliṣṭāḥ. Khyati means false knowledge. However, here it means vivek khyati or object directed samadhi, which means a samadhi that is gained by focusing the mind on any one particular object. Vyasa says those sensations that lead us to object directed samadhi and are an antidote to the effects of the 3 gunas are called non-afflictive sensations. To put it simply, sensations that make us unhappy and miserable are called afflictive, and those that make us happy are called non-afflictive. Although Patanjali divides all sensations into 5 types, which are either afflictive or non-afflictive, it must be noted that they do not exist in watertight compartments. They are always intertwined. Had they existed in watertight compartments, it would have been easy for us to choose the non-afflictive and leave out the afflictive sensations. But this is not the case. That's the reason when we experience pleasurable sensations, the unpleasurable sensations also come along. Although we do not notice the unpleasurable sensations when we are experiencing the pleasurable ones. Vyasa says, kliṣṭākliṣṭāḥ patita apya kliṣṭāḥ. Even in the force of afflictive sensations, non-afflictive sensations remain unaffected. In other words, non-afflictive vrittis do not become afflictive in the company of afflictive sensations. Kliṣṭāchidreshu vapya kliṣṭā bhavanti akliṣṭāchidreshu kliṣṭā iti. Similarly, in the flow of non-afflictive sensations, afflictive sensations do not become non-afflictive. In other words, these sensations do not lose their characteristics. Vyasa says that even in the flow of afflictive sensations, there can be non-afflictive sensations in the mind and vice versa. What he means is that the stimuli that we receive is very complex. Although it reaches us at the same time, it creates different types of sensations on the mind. Even though some of these sensations are harmful and some beneficial, they do not get intermixed. For example, when we mix dirty water with pure water, the pure water also becomes dirty. Vyasa says this is not the case when harmful and beneficial sensations bombard the mind. They retain their original nature. The reason for this is that external stimuli on their own are actually neutral. It's the mind that decides what is good and what's bad, depending upon what is beneficial to us and what's not. Good and bad is a subjective matter. However, in the yogic sense, the sensations that bolster the ego in us, lead us towards unrighteousness and conflict, are called afflictive. And those that take us towards righteousness, dispassion, and self-knowledge are called non-afflictive. The non-afflictive ones may culminate in sampragyāta samadhi or viveka khyati, which can be translated as object-directed samadhi. And once sampragyāta samadhi is attained, we are to get rid of beneficial sensations too, because they also disturb the equilibrium of the mind. As mentioned, good and bad sensations do not exist in watertight compartments. Vyasa says there are pores in them, which means there is always a possibility of change. The possibility of a bad person moving towards samadhi and a good person going the wrong way. If this possibility was not there, there would be no scope for individual improvement. If some persons went wrong, they would not have any possibility of setting themselves right. Yoga says this is not the case. Even the worst possible persons have a chance of redeeming themselves. Vyasa continues, Tatha jatiyakaha sanskara vrittibhirev kriyante sanskaraischa vṛttaya iti. Tatha jatiyakaha. These two types, that is, afflictive and non-afflictive sensations, tatha jatiyakaha sanskara vrittibhirev kriyante. Both afflictive and non-afflictive sensations create afflictive and non-afflictive impressions upon the mind. Sanskaraischa vṛttayaḥ iti. And from these impressions, new afflictive and non-afflictive sensations are born. Evam vritti sanskar chakrama nishama vartate. The vicious cycle of sensations and impressions goes on forever, endlessly. Tadevam bhutam chittama vastitadhikar matmakalpena vyavatisthate pralyam va gachatiti. When the mind, which is colored by these sensations, stops getting affected by them, it regains its true nature or immerses itself in pure consciousness. Vyasa says that both afflictive and non-afflictive sensations create unfavorable and favorable impressions upon the mind. We normally think that we ought to get rid of unpleasurable impressions only. But yoga says we ought to get rid of even pleasurable impressions. However, it's extremely difficult to get rid of impressions and associations that are formed upon the mind. Experience shows us that these impressions have a vice-like grip on our conscience, and it's very difficult to get ourselves free of this grip. The mind, which is colored by these impressions, perceives the world accordingly, and this constant stimulus-response process goes on until the mind becomes free of the shackles of the three gunas and attains dharmamegha samadhi. Dharmamegha samadhi is also called vivek khyati, that is, object-directed samadhi. Later, after negating all sensations, the individual attains nirbija samadhi. Nirbija samadhi means seedless samadhi, a state in which karmas do not produce further good or bad results. The difference between the two is that in dharmamegha samadhi, the mind finds its true nature, but it's still not totally free, as there are some beneficial sensations left in it. So, there's a possibility of it getting involved in the world again. On the contrary, in nirbija samadhi, the mind goes back to its cause, that is, prakriti, forever. Everything in the universe comes out of prakriti and goes back into it. Vyasa says, Tah kliṣṭākliṣṭāḥ pañcatayyaḥ vṛttayaḥ. And these afflictive and non-afflictive sensations are of 5 kinds. These 5 types are enumerated by Patanjali in the next sutra. Praman viparye vikalpa nidra smritayaḥ. Praman viparye vikalpa nidra smritayaḥ. In this sutra, the word praman means the 5 senses through which we perceive the world. They are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Viparye means false knowledge. It means to see things wrongly. Vikalpa means non-denotation, or a word without a corresponding object or idea. Nidra means deep sleep, and smriti means memory. The sutra says, Praman, Viparye, Vikalpa, Nidra, vṛttayaḥ. The sense organs, wrong perception or erroneous perception, non-denotation, deep sleep, and memory create 5 types of impressions upon the mind. Vyasa has not made any comment on this sutra because Patanjali just mentions the names of the 5 kinds of sensations. Later on in the Yogasutram, Patanjali devotes individual sutras to them. In this video, we learned that vrittis or sensations are of 5 types, which generate unpleasurable or pleasurable sensations in us. Unfavorable sensations are called kliṣṭākliṣṭāḥ and the favorable ones are called akliṣṭāḥ, afflictive and non-afflictive respectively. The former lead us to misery and unhappiness, and the latter to happiness. These 2 categories of vrittis do not exist in watertight compartments. Rather, they coexist in an intermingled state without losing their true nature. Although we would love to get rid of misery-generating sensations and keep pleasure-giving sensations, Yoga says we ought to get rid of both types because both disturb the equilibrium of the mind. These 5 types of sensations are pramāṇa, viparya, vikalpa, nidra and smriti. Each of these will be discussed in the next sutra. Yogena chittasya padena vacha alam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarotam pravaram munina Patanjali Pranjali Ranatosmi